Welcome to F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans. I'm your host as always, Terry, and I'm here to keep you up to date with all of the unbiased, hard-hitting Formula 1 news. So grab your favourite mug of coffee, sit down, strap in and get yourself comfortable to join in the conversation. Because this is F1 Coffee Corner. This is Full Beans, the must-have podcast for all Formula 1 fans. Hello and welcome back to the next episode of F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans the podcast. I'm your host as always, Terry, and what have we got on this latest episode? First things first, we're going to be taking the Espresso news with a look back at the Canadian Grand Prix and the winners and losers from that one. Then we've got the coffee chat where we're going to be talking about wind tunnel allocation and car development, and also why I feel we're not getting a full picture from Red Bull and their development of their car. So stay tuned for that one. And then finally, in the takeaway section, we're going to be taking a look forward to the next couple of weeks, which has obviously got Austria and then Silverstone following on from that. So yeah, without further ado, sit down, strap in, and let's give it full beans. So, starting off with the Espresso news and calendar. Now, it was a Grand Prix that promised a lot, but I still think it under-delivered in terms of a spectacle and performance. It didn't seem like it really got going. It had huge potential from the Saturday with the wet qualifying. We had some shops in there. We had Alex Albon in Q3 with a masterstroke of a strategy call from Williams. We had Ferrari just not getting it right with Charles Leclerc's car, and obviously they're missing out. We had Checo missing out on Q3 for what is the third race in a row, I believe. So, yeah, he's going to be feeling under pressure as we head in towards Austria, that's for sure. But then we had the race itself, and whilst it was a great start, Lewis Hamilton straight out of the box, it was a brilliant start. I can't help but feel we had a race where we were being managed. And what I mean by that is we had Aston Martin with their upgrades. Now, we know that Fernando Alonso had issues with his car, so we know that they were nursing his car through. So that's going to impact how much information they had on the upgrade to the AMR23 that we know came on that one. But also, you can't help but feel that the talk of him challenging Max wasn't quite right. I still feel that Max was driving well within the limits of that RB19, which we're going to come on to more in the coffee chat section. And I still think there was a lot more to come from that if Fernando managed to get closer to it. So I don't believe the statement I heard from Aston Martin over the weekend where they felt that without that problem, they would have got a lot closer to Max and the pack are catching Red Bull. I don't believe the pack are catching Red Bull, and I'm going to explain why in the next part. But yeah, in terms of the race itself, it played out pretty much how we expected it to in terms of podium places. The only thing that seems to be debated at the moment is, which way around the Aston Martin and Mercedes is going to go with all this swapping around. We expected Aston Martin to be stronger with their upgrades. We expected Mercedes to be a bit more draggier and struggle a bit more than what they did in Barcelona, and that seemed to be the way. Lewis was never sort of, as soon as he went onto the hard tyres, never really looked like he was going to challenge Fernando for second place, if I'm honest. George obviously had that collision with the wall, and then he had a brake problem, so he had to retire later on in the race. Disappointing for him as he tried to put the hammer down to catch Fernando Alonso at the first part of the race. That really cost him. The Mercedes, like I say, didn't really look good on that hard tyre. As soon as they switched to the hard tyre, they seemed out of it. They had to switch to the mediums for the last stop because that's all they had available in terms of new tyres. It seems to suit the Mercedes better. But again, I don't think that they were going to trouble Fernando. He was managing that issue. As soon as Lewis got to, within touching distance of DRS, they let Fernando off the lifting coast and off he went. So, yeah, I think it was a rightful way to play out. I think that Aston Martin's upgrades have again put them ahead of Mercedes, which is quite interesting. And you've got the McLarens into the mix. You've got also Haas had a terrible race again. Tyre deg on them were poor. Ferrari had a strong race. I thought their strategy call was bad during the race. I was the first to sort of sit there with my head in my hands going, Ferrari, what are you doing when safety come out? But as it turns out, it was a good strategy call. Solid race for them. Interesting comments from Helmut Marko saying that he thought Ferrari, if they got their Saturday qualifying right, would have been in contention a lot more, especially, well, he couldn't didn't catch. He couldn't catch and pass the Ferrari as well. Yeah, maybe there's a bit of truth in that. I'm not so sure. I feel sometimes with some of these statements we hear that it's kind of people blowing smoke at people's backsides for the sake of it. If I'm honest, I don't read too much into them. A lot of the time I kind of take them with a pinch of salt. But yeah, further down the order, AlphaTauri's troubled afternoon continued. They had a bad afternoon. Alex Albon, what a drive. We can't get past this podcast review and not talk about Alex Albon on those tyres. What a drive from him. Superb performance from him and Williams. We know he had the upgraded car. Logan Sargent unfortunately had to retire early. He didn't have the upgrades on his car. He's got to wait till Silverstone for his. But that Williams, looks like a good step in the right direction. And Haas might have to look over their shoulder with Williams making gains. We know that they've just taken over AlphaTauri. So Haas might have to look over their shoulder, especially if they can get Logan Sargent's car up to speed from Silverstone onwards and develop some more on the Williams. And it's going to be really interesting to see if they can claw back. But great drive from Alex Albon. Absolutely stonking performance from him. Driver of the day, without a shadow of a doubt. Glad everyone acknowledged it. It was really good for him. Who haven't I covered really? Alpines had a sort of okay afternoon. Nothing really too good, nothing really too bad. It was one of those. Lance Stroll had a bit of a mare in the second Aston Martin, but managed to get himself to ninth, pipping Valtteri Bottas on the line in a repeat of that time when Valtteri Bottas took the podium away from Lance Stroll when he was driving for Williams in terms of the second place and the third place one. Almost a repeat of that. I think it was 300ths with those on the line. So, yeah. All in all, though, I think Canada was one of those races which, whilst it tended to give us a lot in terms of what we could have had, it kind of played out the same, I think, on the track. But yeah, I mean, let's see. In terms of news, what's coming out, we're hearing a lot about upgrades. I'll come on to takeaways, I think it's really important. Obviously, Red Bull celebrating 100 Grand Prix wins in Formula One, massive achievements. Huge respect to them. When they came in, I remember seeing them when they first burst on the scene, everyone laughing at them that this energy drinks company dared to come into Formula One and upset the apple cart. And you know what? For all of the noise around Red Bull and people talk to them like they're a Marmite team. That I love the fact they're in Formula One. I love seeing Red Bull. I love seeing what they've achieved in sport. I love the fact that they took a dream and went with it. And to see so much of the team actually still involved in Red Bull when they're doing the celebration at the end, they show a lot of the pictures, certainly on LinkedIn, of the people who have been there for the whole journey. And it's just great to see that. Obviously, Adrian Newey, 200 races. Max Verstappen, equally in Ayrton Senna's 41 victories as well. So, all in all, a real record-breaking weekend for Red Bull. Once again, dominant car, great driver Max, certainly one of the all-time greats, showing why he is. And yeah, it's just one of those where it's tough because, we all talk about domination being boring, but there's a part of me that just keeps looking at this car thinking, wow, what have they done with this car? And I want close racing at the front, don't get me wrong. I love the fact close racing and intricacy and, seeing people swapping out changes and championing for the win. But then I'm also a bit of a petrol head in the sense that I love to marvel at the technology. There's a part of me that just keeps looking at that RB19, that Red Bull, just going, wow, what a car. Look what they've done. Let's actually just appreciate for a second just how good this car is. And the fact it could actually go down as one of the greatest cars in terms of, performance, statistics, everything else. So, yeah, it was really good. It's really good to see the talk from Red Bull about, Max talking about how 41's not the end of it, a bit more of seeing what it means to him. He's not one who talks about that very often. He's not a numbers person, as he quite openly admits himself. So it's good to see that. Great to see Adrian Newey on the podium. Absolutely love seeing Adrian Newey up there. And what a podium that was. Adrian Newey, Max Verstappen, Fernando Alonso, and Lewis Hamilton are all sharing a podium out there. That's like a ghost of a podium, isn't it? If you could write a greatest in Formula One podium, that would be up there. Using current drivers, that's for sure. So, I don't think there's too much to dwell on in terms of Canada. It was a good race. The rain made it very interesting. The setups made it very, very interesting. But I still can't help but feel the race itself kind of let me down. I kind of wanted more. Bit of a debacle with the stewards and the FIA. Let's have a talk about that before we move on. It's just taking too long. Too many things taking too long. Too many inconsistencies. Lewis was lucky that he didn't get a couple of penalties. Let's be honest about it. I think the unsafe release in the race itself was a slam dunk for a penalty, especially when you consider Lando's unsportsmanlike conduct for holding up a safety car or holding up the team's, while a safety car was out. You kind of then look at that and think, well, how did that get a penalty? And Lewis's didn't. I thought Lewis was quite lucky also in qualifying. I think he held up. I think it was Stroll on a hot lap. And maybe at least should have seen the stewards. The stewards themselves were just busy. They seemed to crawl everything on Saturday and kind of take Sunday off, it felt. But then we had the debacle of turn 2 and the wall and going over the grass, and then they removed the wall and just things like that. We had obviously FP1. Let's talk about FP1 in CCTV. being off and not being able to run FP1 and then extending FP2 by half hour because you could only give an extra half hour because that's what the rules say. Do you know what I mean? Just some of these things just make the FIA just look like amateurs sometimes. So, yeah, hopefully it'll be better in Austria. We're back to a sprint format. I'll cover more about that in the takeaway. But yeah, in other news, there's not too much really going on around a race weekend. You don't get lots of other snippet stuff. Lewis Hamilton's contract talks are still being held up and stalled. Mentioned there's fine print sort out with that one. We're hearing talk about 2 contracts being signed, an ambassador one as well as a driver's one. One being a short-term, sort of 1 year plus 1 year, so a 2-year deal with a ambassador role bolted on. So lots and lots and lots going on in the world of that. George Russell's had a contract extension to take him through to 2025 now. So yeah, as we approach this mid-season mark, we know that there's going to be some talk of this stuff going on. And some drivers feeling under pressure. Nick de Vries is going to be feeling pressure. I don't think Logan Sargent's going to be feeling pressure too much because Williams are running an upgraded car of Alex Albon. So I think that kind of makes me think they're going to stick with Logan Sargent, certainly for the season, on the basis of it would be harsh to get rid of a rookie driver who you've not even given the upgrade to. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that one plays out. But, yeah, as we hit summer season, we're going to be seeing, some driver moves. Not so much this year, I don't think. I think next year is key. But, Mercedes are making moves to lock their drivers out of the market. A lot of the teams are trying to lock down drivers. So we're hearing Ferrari trying to lock down Charles Leclerc for a contract extension. I think, we know that Lando's got his long-term extension with McLaren. He seems to be forever being kicked around a move. But, the F1 arcade developments that Lando's put money in, Logan Sargent's put money in, Zach Brown's put money in. Zach Brown and Lando Norris are doing a lot of intricate business deals, which makes me think that Lando's long-term future is indeed at McLaren, right or wrongly, in terms of winning the championship. But it does make me feel that relationship has got a lot of legs to run before it's broken. Zach Brown's invested in Quadrant. There's a lot in there, so I don't see that happening itself. So without, sort of sitting here rambling on for 20 minutes on what I think about the world of Formula One, that is your calendar review and also your Expresso news. So hopefully that was good for you. Now, on to the coffee chat and development. This is an interesting one. So the new wind tunnel allocations have currently been released. Now, for those who don't know, the way the wind tunnel allocations work, if you see my video, is I'll speed through on this because it is quite a long-winded thing and quite boring. But in essence, the way the wind tunnel allocation is done, it's done on a yearly basis in terms of January to December because the teams work all year round. And every halfway point, they recalculate it. Now, your calculation is done on where you finished your Constructors' Championship last year and also where you currently are in Constructors' Championship. So it gives you a bit of real life in there. And the two go in together and give you wind tunnel times. Now, as it stands, Red Bull will say the same because they're top of the championship. Mercedes actually lose wind tunnel time because they were third, they're now second. Aston Martin are massive losers because they were, I think it was 7th or 8th, and they're obviously now third. Ferrari will gain some wind tunnel time. And lots of McLaren and Alfa Romeo and who's the other one? I want to say Alpine. They will gain a bit of time. Ferrari will gain time. I'll probably mention them. Haas will say the same. Williams and AlphaTauri, the swap round will actually mean that Williams will lose time and AlphaTauri will gain time. So, yeah, in the shout, that's wind tunnel time. The other reason why I think this is all going to play into development, and this is why now, we know that Red Bull have got their penalty, so it takes their wind tunnel time down all the way down to 63% compared to AlphaTauri at the bottom, who've got 115% of the wind tunnel time. So you see a massive difference between the two in terms of how much you can use your wind tunnel. But why I want to talk about development is we know that Mercedes have brought development. We know that they've got development inbound for Silverstone. We know that they've been pushing hard. We know that Aston Martin have pushed hard with development. Now that is, all of these things have been done on the back of this June the 30th deadline. The teams know that from June the 30th, their wind tunnel allocation changes. So therefore, they've been rushing in, especially if you're a team that's going to lose wind tunnel time, like Aston Martin, like Mercedes. You're going to use all of this to your advantage to try and push, which is why Silverstone now becomes quite important in terms of upgrade, because this is the last big push of the teams before the new wind tunnel allocation. So therefore, if they've had extra time, they've pushed it into it. Now, what we can't tell, obviously, is how much of this development is going on next year's car, because your wind tunnel time is a total pot of runs. it's up to you how you divvy that up between this year and next year's car. So you've got a set amount of time. It's entirely in your domain. So how much you develop to, develop a next year's car, or how much you want to develop your current car and this year's car. And that's where I want to come on to Red Bull. Now, Red Bull, we know, have been hit with this wind tunnel penalty. However, they have said openly and honestly last weekend that they have switched off development pretty much for the RB19 and is now focusing on next year's car. That's ominous for the rest of the grid, if I'm honest. And the reason they've been able to do this is because competitively they're so far ahead. No one's getting near them. And we keep hearing people saying they're closing the gap, closing the gap, closing the gap. I don't think they are. Now, I heard something, a theory, we call it, and in this theory, it explains how they feel that Red Bull have got another 0.6 to 1.2 seconds in their locker, and that they're actually running with turned down engines deliberately to hide the true pace of the RB19. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one is that they don't actually want to show the true pace because they don't have to. So why would you? It places unnecessary risk on the car, on the engine. There's no need to do it. Number two, they don't want to make it look like their punishment was not severe enough for the cost cap. So therefore, they're deliberately running it slower. Not too sure about that one. That kind of makes me go, not too sure that one. And then the third one is that they just, they're trying out new parts for next year. They don't want to show all these new parts deliberately because they show their hand early. That will allow everyone to close up, which kind of makes sense on that one too. So it's a really interesting theory that people are talking about Red Bull potentially having another 1 second in the locker on these cars. And did the cost cap penalty actually affect them that much? Because the advantage is so big and it's always been so big. So what this theory is saying is, and the way it's come about is, it's actually been taking the fastest laps that Max is able to set in the race and when he's able to set it. So for those of you who know, normally when you set a fastest lap, it's normally done by coming into the pits, bolting on a fresh pair of softs, going out towards the end of the race, smash fastest lap. Or it's normally done after a pit stop when you've got a new set of tyres. However, there's been so many instances in the past few weeks where Max has been settling them on old used tyres, and some very old tyres in some cases as well, and be able to just literally drop the lap time and go get that fastest lap. And then what they're saying is, if you take that as a true reflection of what the actual race pace is of the Red Bull, that shows how much they're hiding, which does make sense, because if you couldn't physically go at that speed, then surely if you did that lap in, lap out, but only, a couple of tenths off, this gap, which is supposedly closing, would suddenly go back like that. And then, hey presto, Red Bull's gap hasn't diminished. It's actually got bigger as they've developed the car. That's a scary thought. That is a thought where you sit there and you go, oh my God, actually, is this car that good that it's got that much in the locker? Now, we know the teams are closing hard on development, so we know that the likes of Aston Martin are closing down, but we also know that Aston Martin struggled. They struggled in Barcelona, and they come back to it, like I was saying, in Canada, and they were managing the problem with Fernando's car, so what much is their upgrade? They're doing another one soon. That's obviously, like I said earlier, all these upgrades are coming off the wind tunnel allocations that they've had. But what we're going to have in the second half of the season is, where do teams actually play it? So we know that Mercedes want to look at next year. They've already said that. They said that they know where to go with the car, but they can't afford to do it in the current cost cap. But then on next ref, we also had Total coming out saying, we've got 2 big upgrades. One of them is massive. Well, Mercedes have already brought massive upgrades, and their wind tunnel allocation, they're only third in the championship, so they weren't massively down. To bring the level of upgrades that they're bringing is either an all-in where the rest of the season they're going to bring nothing at all, or it's a benchmark for next year, so they know what to do with it, and they're testing it and hoping no one gets sight of it. But as we saw in like Monaco, when the cars were hoisted up on the cranes, you run the risk of teams finding out what you're cooking. And if you put too many upgrades on your car this year that you're going to use next year, you're giving teams that advantage of knowing what you're going to run with. The whole idea of upgrading your car and bringing it in for next year is that it's a bit of a secret. You don't know what's coming to it. And if you've got it on show and then everyone sees it, it don't work, does it? So I'm not sure how much of the stuff that we're seeing on the cars are for next year. I think Mercedes have got a lot, but that bodywork on that Mercedes, on that W14, does look still not defined. It looks very, almost like it's bolted on. I'll keep going back to this. I feel there's more to come from the Mercedes. We know they've talked about rear suspension. We know they've talked about a new chassis. They've said they can't do it this year. Be interesting to see what they do. This big upgrade that's coming for Silverstone is probably around the floor and the main beam and diffuser area, potentially, and maybe some profile shaping on the side pods. Again, not an expensive cost cut, but a big upgrade. And when Total says it's a big upgrade, Total might be referring to big in terms of performance, not big in terms of money, which is the other thing you got to remember as well. Mercedes were desperate to get the wind tunnel time because they needed a wind tunnel to correlate what they were getting on track, which didn't happen with the W13. So the fact that now they've got that correlation, it seems, from what they learned in Monaco and then obviously what they learned in Barcelona and obviously now Canada, they now know that the car is doing what it should do in terms of wind tunnel. So the theory being, quite simply, when you develop something in the wind tunnel, it should now work on the track. That's their theory behind it, which wasn't happening last year, but is happening now. So maybe we will see these incremental gains from Mercedes quite quickly. They're going to be gunning for Aston Martin. I'll keep going back to that. They don't want Aston Martin to finish above them in the Constructors' Championship. It's not good for a works car to have that at all. But in terms of the other cars' developments, there's so many teams now who are going to make the switch next year. We've heard Williams talk about it. AlphaTauri came with a massive upgrade a couple of races ago. Bigger than Mercedes one, so they're looking at that. McLaren have got a huge upgrade coming for Silverstone, where they feel they've finally sorted out the floor and they'll be competitive. So that'd be really good to see. Haas seems to be dependent on what Ferrari do development-wise, and Ferrari don't do big developments in terms of little often. They tend to try and bring these big packages 3 or 4 times a year, which doesn't always work for them, as we found out in Barcelona. But they seem to have certainly made improvements on tyre deg, that's for sure, in Canada, and hopefully that'll carry on continuing. We know that Silverstone is bringing with it new tyres, so new harder tyres in terms of the compound. They're bringing the 2024 tyres early, so we'll see what that one also and the effect that has on the cars. A lot of Pirelli tyre testing going on. Now, what you've got to remember with Pirelli tyre testing is there are set parameters when you do these. So I've heard a bit of talk where people are saying, is it actually, do the teams gain from it? They kind of gain from it because obviously they get data, and every time they get data is always good. However, they don't gain from it in the sense they can't make setup changes. And they've got a determined set from Pirelli of what their setup needs to be. The tyres themselves, obviously different tyres. So whilst they will gather some data, it's not really beneficial in terms of developing your car. It's more about seeing how the tyre reacts. And every team has the set parameters. So again, I'm not too sure how much data you're going to get from it, but it's an interesting theory. We know that after Silverstone, there's another one. Haas are taking part in it. Red Bull are taking part of it. So it is equally spaced across the season over various tracks. So what team helps with the Pirelli tyre test as well. So it's not just favoured towards the bigger teams, that's for sure. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the coffee chat part. It seems like I said, it's interesting to see how this development is going to take forward teams. It's really going to be interesting to see how the teams now react to the new allocation of the wind tunnel, how many are going to put into next year, how many teams are quite happy and content staying where they are, how many teams might even play a bit of the wind tunnel game. I mean, like I said, Williams lost 5% just by Alex Albon's performance in Canada, which was great for Williams, not great for the wind tunnel, is it? Let's be honest about it. So it'd be really interesting to see how this plays out with the cars and the teams and what their development looks like, what they want to bring. Like I say, lots and lots of upgrades due Silverstone-wise, lots of floor changes, lots of body changes, all these things which should make a difference to the performance of the cars. They now understand these cars, they now understand this year's cars in terms of where they've gone, and they've also got one on next year as well. So it's going to make for an interesting race. Whether or not Mercedes can win it, who knows? We wait to find out. But like I say, I don't think that gap is closing to Red Bull as much as the press and the teams are making it out to be. But we'll wait and see, won't we? So with that in mind, let's move on to the takeaway part. And we look at obviously Austria and Silverstone. Now we've covered obviously bits of it, especially around Silverstone. So Austria, we go to next weekend, is back to a sprint format. Now it's back on the sprint format that was brought in at the beginning of the season for Baku. So what that means is Friday free practice, Friday qualifying for the race itself. So not for the sprint itself, for the race itself. And that will set the grid for the race on Sunday. Saturday morning, we'll see the sprint shootout, which will then set the grid for Saturday afternoon and the sprint race itself. And then back to Sunday for the race with the grid that was qualified on Friday afternoon / evening. I think I've got that right. I really apologise if I got that wrong. I've been sat here in my head trying to work out which way the format goes, but I'm pretty sure that's it. Friday qualifying, Sunday's race, Saturday morning qualifying for Saturday's sprint race. That's it in a nutshell. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I'm pretty sure that's where we're going to go over it. It's a track that normally, springs up a few surprises. I don't think it's going to suit Mercedes going around there. It's certainly going to suit Aston Martin more than it does suit Mercedes, so expect that change around to make. It's going to suit the Red Bull, it always does, and they're going to want to put on a show in the Red Bull ring. Checo's going to be in, and he's going to be feeling the pressure. Like I said earlier, Checo hasn't hit Q3 for the last 3 races, yet Logan Sargent has hit Q3 twice in the same amount of times in the Williams. Now, that's pressure, isn't it? Let's be honest about it. And so he's going to want to put on a good performance. Max is going to want to come out and dominate it all. I think he will. I think that Red Bull's going to be too strong on there. I think the Red Bull fans are going to be celebrating in the Red Bull Arena come Austria, that's for sure. So with that in mind, I don't think there's too much to talk about. Like I said, I did change the format of these podcasts a few weeks ago where I tried to keep them to about the 30-minute mark. I don't like them being long-winded. I know if I'm listening to them, I like it quite short, quite snappy, and would really appreciate your feedback. As always, if you do get a chance and you are listening to this on the device that lets you, please hit the subscribe button, hit the following button. I prefer using the word following because I'm not asking for any cash from anybody. So, if you can hit subscribe, please do so. If you could hit, some reviews on there, that'd be great to boost the podcast up. And likewise, if you've got any questions, if you've got anything that you want to ask or anything you want to see on the podcast in future, if you like this format, if you don't like this format, please let me know. My contact details are available. Just hit one of the links in one of the bios on all the social media. So there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's TikTok. All of those have got a link in it where you can just click on it. It's got all of my details in there for social medias, and also it's got a contact me form. So if anyone does want to get in touch, there's obviously WhatsApp, there's messages, various ways you can get in touch. So really appreciate hearing from everybody. There are a couple of things on the horizon coming up in terms of different podcasts. So those of you who do follow me will know that I do Fans Talk F1 podcast with F1 Matt after the race, which is very much a race review podcast. So very different to this one. This one I tried to make a bit more around what's coming up and what prepped him ready to go. So hopefully that's something which will be really good. Hopefully it's something which will be well received. That will be on Fans Talk F1 on that podcast. So make sure you drop in the same as that one, subscribe like that one. Shameless plugs going on here. And with all of that in mind, we're pretty much at the 30-minute mark. So once again, I thank you for listening. It's a quick one, but do you know what? I don't think it's a bad one. What do they say? Quality over quantity. Welcome to F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans. I'm your host as always, Terry, and I'm here to keep you up to date with all of the unbiased, hard-hitting Formula 1 news. So grab your favourite mug of coffee, sit down, strap in and get yourself comfortable to join in the conversation. Because this is F1 Coffee Corner. This is Full Beans, the must-have podcast for all Formula 1 fans.